Hello, welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Tuesday, April the 7th in the Memorial Arena in Victoria, BC. I'd like to thank the volunteer crew and Shaw staff that makes the show possible. Another amazing week in the world. The first part of Citizens Forum is always the Walter and Jack show. So this week, I think we're going to really see the power of the corporate media on display this week, because this is what's happening. Canada has essentially declared war on Syria, and when the first bomb drops, then there will be no question anymore that Canada has declared war on Syria. Nobody in Canada seems to know. The media won't say it. Where's Bill C-51? It's kind of disappeared from public view. Has it been passed? Has it not been passed? We don't know. Nor do we know the important testimony that's been taking place in Ottawa over the last couple of weeks. Discussing Bill C-51 in parliamentary committees over the objections of the Harper government. So that's all happening. Plus we have, as Walter's said a few times over the last few weeks, this story that's directly linking Stephen Harper to the smuggling of young girls out of Turkey and into Syria to join ISIS. So that's what's happening in this country, in the world. And we're going to hear about Mike Duffy for the next however long they want to feed it to us. And that's one way, just one way that the media operates. They take a story that's really, it's tawdry, it's of limited importance, and they pretend it's the most important thing in the world, and they use it to cover up everything else. And it's very effective. And I know it's going to be effective now because it already has been effective. You know, you're talking to people, it's Mike Duffy. You mention Bill C-51, nobody, you can't talk about it. So that's unfortunate because it's really, they're destroying our country in case, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Safe radiation has now washed up on the BC coast. So when I say they're destroying our country, I mean it. So that's, take it away, Walter.
Well, there's lots to talk about. The media circus on Mike Duffy. I've read the papers. I'm trying to figure out the story. What's going on, and it's kind of hard to encapsulate it into one sentence because there's a lot of ingredients to the story. There's a lot not being talked about. There's a lot of unsettling things about when these famous news media people like Mike Duffy and Pamela Wallin, they dropped the facade of being objective, and that they joined the team. They joined the Conservative team, and they were star fundraisers for the Conservative Party, raised millions and millions of dollars for the Conservative Party, Patrick Duffy particularly, and the unsettling part of that is that you have what was kind of the separation of the news media and the politicians, and when you see them marrying up like that, and you can see what the devastating consequences are, there seems to be such a sense of entitlement by these people.
But you know what? It's almost as if they picked on Mike Duffy and Pamela Wallin, because his defense is that everybody's doing it.
Yeah, and that's the other part of the story, is that everybody was doing it and probably still doing it, and he feels like he's singled out.
Yeah.
But the hard facts of the case don't shine well on Mike Duffy.
Or any of the others.
He claimed expenses that really weren't proper. The 31 charges against him, several of them are going to stick. But the big charge, of course, is the writing of the $90,000 check by Nigel Wright, which is Harper's chief of staff. It looked like a payoff to get rid of Duffy, get rid of a headache. Duffy's claiming, no, he didn't put any pressure on the PMO at all. It's just that these guys came up with that solution sort of to get rid of him. But that issue right there, and I don't know, Stephen Harper was in the media today saying, oh, he's not worried about it because there's been no direct link drawn to him on the Nigel Wright affair. And like there's no direct link drawn Stephen Harper and smuggling teenage girls into Syria. You know, he wasn't there doing it. Somebody else was doing it for him. And Nigel Wright was doing something for him. I mean, they're smart enough not to leave a memo that explains the situation.
Or maybe they don't, but the media refuses to cover the
If
other
they
stories.
did.
Like, look at the importance of these stories. War on Syria, and we don't know what's going to happen with it. I mean, as my understanding is that right now, today, if the Syrian Air Force had the capability, they would have the legal right to bomb Canada and perhaps miss the target they're going for and hit a school like we do over there and kill lots of innocent children. I think they have the right because we've essentially declared war and we're preparing. We're preparing to attack them. They have the right of self-defense, but we have no right to be attacking them. And yet our totally corrupt nation, it seems, and I mean the leadership, doesn't care. They're taking us into a war and it's being covered up with Mike Duffy. And boy, folks, we are in a lot of trouble and we had better get our heads out of the sand. And I honestly don't know what we can do as individuals, but we've got to start doing more than we are doing because it looks like the road we're on is leading to absolute disaster.
Yeah, I agree, because in the end, who's going to go to jail? Who's really going to suffer from the consequences of this? These sort of people, well, you know, what's his name with the jail? I can't think of his name. Conrad Black, he managed to get himself in jail for not that long, and he stole millions. So this, you know, who's going to really suffer in the end? Not but anybody. As you say, it just becomes a media circus and a distraction away from other really huge issues. So I agree with you on that. Although it's of interest because of the political culture, it's of interest of the issues they're not talking about around this event. I think there are some things we should pay attention to, but not place too much weight on the issues.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about one of the most boring topics that's ever come up on this show, which is parliamentary committees. And when I say boring, I don't mean it, because it's probably the most important thing. But we never talk about it. We know nothing about it. I started to write a book about democracy many years ago, and along the way, I heard something about parliamentary committees. I didn't know anything about parliamentary committees. I still know virtually nothing about them. But I think they're very important because when laws get passed in Canada, it should start with a parliamentary committee, right? A parliamentary committee going out to the public and seeing, like, let's say Bill C. Well, let's say the labeling of genetically contaminated foods. Let's take that. A parliamentary committee should go out, find out what Canadians want, and then Parliament should devise that kind of a law. And obviously, Canadians want these poisonous foods labeled, that's obvious, and maybe we don't want them growing here, but they never ask us at all. It's never mentioned. But parliamentary committees should go out to us, find out what do you want with genetically engineered foods, and find out what we want and do it. But instead what happens is the Prime Minister, working for whoever he works for and who pulls his strings, he creates the laws. And he runs them through Parliament because he has total power, the power of a dictator. Stephen Harper has that power, Christy Clark has that power, Jean Chrétien had the power, Paul Martin has the power, and the various party leaders are also very powerful. That's not the way it's supposed to be. So we should be thinking about parliamentary committees because they are part of the way to get us out of this mess that we're in, I hope.
I'm glad you bring it up because we're going to be talking to Dr. Martin Blank later on the show, and there's something good happening in a parliamentary committee. So it can actually happen, maybe almost by accident.
Yeah, you mentioned the story to me a few minutes ago, and believe me, that story is much more important and much more interesting and much more engaging than the cheap and tawdry Mike Duffy story.
Yeah.
Just that one parliamentary committee. I think a lot of Canadians would be very interested, but they won't tell us about it. Instead, they tell us about Mike Duffy because that's what they want us thinking about. That's why crime and violence are always in the media, because they want us focused on that.
Yeah.
It's divisive, it instills fear. It's wonderful for the people who run the country, who want us divided and off balance. But we've got to do better, somehow.
No doubt about it. We have to lengthen our attention spans a little bit so you can actually absorb some of this information.
But even if you lengthen your attention span and you happen to follow the corporate media, you're never going to see any of this. I mean, it just isn't there.
Yeah, so there are some problems there. But the thing is, Jack, on that note, I mean, where do you think Bill C-51 really came from? Do you think anybody in the government wrote that? I mean, we had our attacks on Parliament. You know, the guy runs around with a gun and shoots some people, and all of a sudden, like the next day, we have Bill C-51 right out of the blue. It makes you wonder, maybe the guys that planned the shootings also wrote the bill, because you go like, oh, wow, that's so. Like, remember 9/11 happened, and then the next week there was a massive legislation ready to go in the United States about national security. I can't remember what they called it. It was a massive piece of legislation, thousands of pages.
And I remember speaking to lawyers here, because we had similar legislation in Canada, and she said, these laws can't be created this quickly. They were prepared beforehand.
They're written by public relations firms, Jack. PR people write this stuff.
Yes, and it's like the PR firms are the link between the people who run the world and our governments.
And it's such a spin. Remember last week when you said about the sovereign state of Iraq has asked Canada to bomb northern Syria, and you're like, who the heck came up with that line? You know that these PR people sit around a table and they toss those ideas around and they see what flies, and you know it's just all spin. And all that legislation, where they should be going to parliamentary committees, coming in with issues and ideas and concerns, work that up into some language that can be understood. As you say, go do investigations, do a study, come back, write that legislation up best they can in the committee, then bring it forward. That's the way it should work. But as you say, it just comes from public relations firms write the laws and legislation. But they write it on behalf of large corporate interests and rich people. They present that to the Prime Minister and his ministers, who are just shills for the corporations, and then they ram it through the Parliament and legislatures, and then they become the masters of spin and BS to sell it to the public and try to survive another election. That's our whole.
And it doesn't matter if they lose the next election, because the next party is exactly the same.
They have somebody else, like you have the Liberals in British Columbia, and then you have this NDP all lining up to win in the last election, just promising the corporations every last thing. So nothing was going to change.
Well, I think you've put your finger on exactly how corrupt it is.
But it can be different, though, Jack. I think the number one thing we have to remember is we have to understand the problems and be clear about what the problems are. We know these guys are corrupt, but we have to really get into the mechanisms and how they pull this stuff off, and really work at supporting political parties, supporting candidates that are opposed to that.
Yeah. And at the same time, we, the public, have got to rise up and say we want a more democratic political system that represents us, because the political system we got doesn't give a damn about us. We are completely and totally irrelevant in our own country. The corporations run the country. They run all the governments. I would say, I think I can safely say that, all the governments, right down to the city governments in many, many cases, and they own all the big media. So they have the power. We've got to turn that around so that we own the media, and the media works for what we want, and not me, but we. And we've got to retake control of our political system. So, as you said, the committees go out, they find out what we want, and those become the laws. I mean, it sounds like heaven.
Yeah, well, like Victoria Mayor Lisa Helps, last week came up with the idea about providing a piece of land for people, for homeless people, so they're not camping in parks. It costs around $750,000 a year for all this policing and cleaning up and all this stuff. And the common sense thing to do is find a piece of land that's appropriate, that people find acceptable. They can put little more permanent structures there. They're safer there. It's a little more
But the real
organized.
common sense thing to do is that this never should have happened. Why are we in this situation
Yeah.
where we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of homeless people roaming the street? who created this mess? And I'll tell you exactly who created it. It was the people who run this country.
Yeah.
I mean, I followed it over the last 25, 30 years, how they created poverty, how they shut down the housing programs, how they shipped the jobs overseas. I mean, it's all there. They did it deliberately, and they took away the social safety net, and they put the money in their own pockets, and they have deliberately created this system, and now we got to figure out how to deal with it. It's completely insane.
Well, it's right. I agree. I can't disagree with that. But what I'm saying is that at least she's thinking outside the box a little bit
Yep.
here. You know what I mean? She's just using some common sense here, and it's refreshing. You don't know if it's a how good an idea is that. I'm not sure, but at least there's somebody thinking. At least somebody's coming up with something. All the other counselors and everybody else is coming up with more cops, more,
No, I was talking to somebody involved in that, and,
Yeah.
I think it's widespread. There's a lot of people pushing that idea. There are a lot of people.
So there are creative things happening.
Yeah.
And I think we just got to get behind the good stuff and support it.
Media is important, so I sent an email yesterday to the CRTC and TELUS. TELUS has satellite and cable TV here in town, but they don't have a community TV station. And I think they're supposed to have. I'm not quite sure. They used to have, I think, many years ago here. There was a TELUS community TV station, but I think they went to the CRTC and they said nobody wants that station. And I don't think they really told anybody what they were doing, but they disappeared it. So the station is now gone. And TELUS doesn't provide a community TV station anymore. But I think they should. I think, TELUS, I think under the rules, TELUS is supposed to provide a community TV station so people can have access, who get TELUS, to something other than the corporate mainstream media. So we'll see how that goes. I think it's important. I mean, I'd really like to be able to have people providing input on programming, community programming onto TELUS.
We got to. I think we should be always asking our viewers to send us in ideas. I see there's some good stuff happening. Some short films that are now being shown on Shaw. Very good. They're very interesting. Lots of good qualities to them, and there's a lot of creative people around. There's so many other things that we can do with our little station here in Victoria, and it can enhance our lives and become part of this movement. And last week you had was it Dr. Sweep?
Oh yeah, Captain Sweep.
What was his
Captain
name?
Sweep.
Captain Sweep. Sorry, I apologize, Captain Sweep. But anyway, just very entertaining to watch, and there's a lot of people with very creative ideas like his for forming little media teams. I love that idea. Get together, look at a story, get together, try to figure it out, try to write up an article. This is so good because, since I've started coming on talking to you on this show, I have to start reading the paper a little more carefully now. I have to look around a little more carefully, and I get a lot out of it. I enjoy it. So just by participating, you can get so much.
I think there's an urgency to all of this. It may already be, it always amazes me where we're at. So I heard on the radio a couple of days ago that the first radiation from Fukushima has now been detected in the ocean off of Ucluelet, Long Beach area. And it was interesting because the story on CFAX was that this is safe, and it couldn't possibly be any safer. And I really don't believe the media anymore, but on the other hand, I really, really, really hope they're right. Because if they're wrong, and if they're deliberately misinforming us, then we're in big trouble. We're in bigger trouble than...
Well, safety is, what does that mean? How safe, No radiation safer than some radiation. So I'm concerned about how this story's rolling out. I think we have to really examine it very, very carefully. And I'm with you, Jack. I'm hoping we dodge this bullet somehow or other. We dodge this bullet, and then hopefully we learn a lesson about nuclear energy and how profoundly unsafe it is.
Yeah. And just an update on Fukushima. I think there were 5 meltdowns. I could be wrong on the number. They said a meltdown would never happen. So there were, let's say, 4 or 5 meltdowns. They still don't know. I think we're 4 years into this. They don't know where the nuclear fuel is. It's basically melted out of the pods and into the earth. It's sort of disappeared. They honestly don't know where it is. They can't get anywhere close to it because even robots can't go into this high radiation area and survive. It just destroys them. It's seeping into the ocean on a daily basis or pouring in, who knows, and no doubt going into the air as well. It's a nightmare. And we've got to back away from that immediately and really take a look at all industrial technology. I think we've just got to slow down.
I agree, and I think if anything that the international community could ever get together on and cooperate would be to solve Fukushima. We have to develop new technology, and we have to do it in a way that's not based upon economics. It has to be based upon saving the planet. It might take hundreds of billions of dollars to really cap that pollution, but I think it's time that the United States and all the major countries in the world get together and decide, okay, we're going to take over here and we're going to contain this.
Walter, thank you very much.
Pleasure, Jack.
Thank you for watching this segment of Citizens Forum, and all the issues we discussed today are probably not going to be mentioned anywhere in the corporate media this week because they're going to be talking about Mike Duffy. Welcome to segment 2 of Citizens Forum, being filmed on Tuesday, April the 7th. Our guest in this segment is Bruce Pinard, and we're going to be talking about a few different things, but we're going back 10 or 11 years to, I remember this quite well, the privatization of, you just told me it was 8,000 jobs for people who did the housekeeping work and the dietary work, in all the hospitals in British Columbia. That was 10 years ago. It was a huge issue at the time because basically those people were being cut from a living wage in our hospitals to a poverty wage. And there was a lot of anger about the government doing that. And you were involved in it, so let's start with that. Welcome.
Welcome, and thank you for having me. I think primarily what we have to try to understand here, Jack, is the fact that, yes, it was 8,000 workers that were affected by this, but there were also children of those workers who were affected by this. And this BC Liberal government has a horrendous record with regards to how children are treated in this province. As you know, child poverty, for instance, it's the highest in Canada. Why is that? And why is it that we've had massive cuts for 11, 12, 13 years? Continued cuts, and yet there are subsidies for corporations. There are subsidies for Nestle's for fresh water to the tune of thousands and thousands of gallons, and they're not paying their fair share in order for that money to go back into the public purse to help pay for our education. And this is where we've fallen short. And what they did to those hospital workers, and I was one of them, was absolutely horrendous.
It was. It took thousands of people who were doing important work in our hospitals and put them into basically poverty level jobs. It was, and the money, I mean, this isn't to save money. It's never about saving money. It's to transfer the money
well, it's
to them and their friends.
It's a redistribution of wealth.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Now, I was making $18.90 an hour. When they made the transition to the private provider, the wage was reduced to $9.25 an hour. Now, you're working in a hospital, you expect to have sick time. Well, the sick time was brought down to 2 days a year and you couldn't accrue it. Okay, so we're talking, this is archaic. Everything that the union movement had built its pride and its membership on was eliminated, and the contract was also torn up. And that's what started the ball rolling. Gordon Campbell tore the contract up between the HEU and the government with respects to these 8,000 workers. So from the beginning, it was wrong. And even the business community at that time said, look, tearing up a contract, that's not good business.
There was a lot of anger, a lot of knowledge, and the price paid by, I guess, basically 8,000 families and more. 8,000 families in BC was very, very high. But that, and you know, there's been many thousands more. They pick us off one group at a time. So, and the role of the unions in this was, I thought, as it so often is, the union leadership is kind of not up to the task. They're not able to do the job. It's kind of pathetic, in a sense, how bad, because they have a lot of resources. I mean, they've got tens of thousands of members and some pretty big chunks of money, and they do nothing.
Well, at that time, there were 450,000 members in 2004, union members. And the BC Federation of Labor, I believe the administrator was Jim Sinclair. Now, I was quite outspoken, and anytime I had an opportunity to get on camera during the strike, I made sure that I did. Unfortunately, the union didn't like a lot, I guess, about what I was saying. And I guess you can say that I was blackballed. I was told not to speak on camera, but I continued to speak anyway. I said, well, who else is?
Exactly.
People, I would look at people and I'd go, do you want to go on camera and speak? No. Do you want to go on camera and speak? No. So I wasn't about to let the opportunity of that kind of exposure go by the wayside. So I got on and I spoke. And I spoke with regards to about the umbrella effect of bringing unions together, because at that time they were fracturing themselves off. You'd have the nurses union on one side, you'd have HEU on this, you'd have the steel workers over here, you'd have the teachers over here. Let's get together. Let's defeat this privatization plan and show the Campbell government and the Christy Clark government, let's make that clear, okay, that we're a force to be reckoned with. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and we were forced back to work.
Yeah. Well, what I don't, you know, all I remember is, was there a strike going on?
Yes.
But of course, a lot of people couldn't strike because you had to keep the hospitals open. And then all of a sudden, one day, the union signed the agreement that everybody was against. The union leadership just of the HEU, I guess, or whatever, just signed the agreement, and basically after that, all the anger just disappeared because it was done out of the blue.
Well, and you speak of anger, and I speak of humor.
Yeah.
And humor is a wonderful, wonderful thing. As you know, people love comedy, and a lot of comedy is based on reality. And what I did was I decided, well, I had to do something, and I created some posters that I thought were in good taste. They could have been a lot worse.
I'm sure they could.
They could have been. Here's one. It's a magazine. Of course, it's a format, and it's called Amateurs, and it's a magazine for the mundane. We have down here where I said decoding gourds or gods changing minds. There are some NDP politicians who just love that quote. But what is really interesting, and it brings back power pirate politics, looting our hydro, that's another stick in the craw for me.
Yeah, all of us.
You know, raising our costs, and reducing our public revenue that we receive from hydro. I can't understand how we've been allowed to let that happen.
Well, just like those 8,000 jobs were privatized, the corporations run the province, and everything is for them. And here is one of their puppets, maybe.
Well, you know, this is the master puppet, of course, and it's Gordon Campbell. When I can remember where I was the precise time I heard that he had an impaired driving charge. I was driving in my car, I was listening to the radio, and I almost had an accident. I was so excited and so overwhelmed and so happy. So what we've got here is Trapper, because what he'll do is he will trap you into lies. He will tell you that he's not selling BC Rail. He sells BC Rail. It's a 999-year lease, which is, I don't think probably anywhere in the world there's a 999-year lease.
Is there really?
Yes, right.
We're so pathetic.
Right. Hydro Hustler, what did he do? He did the same thing with hydro.
Yeah.
He sold basically our hydro, but it's the run-of-the-river projects.
Yeah.
And of course, we're paying 2.5 times the going rate for what they're supplying hydro, and we have a contract so that we have to buy it from those private producers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's that costing the public?
Yeah. Well, they've signed contracts for about $50 billion
Yes.
worth of, and we're paying
And-
every month. That's why your rates are going
I
up.
know.
The media never tells us, but that's why the rates are going up.
It's ridiculous. Why 80% of us are being hurt by this,
Yeah.
and the 20% aren't, and yet there's a portion of us, 80%, that are continuing to vote for the 20% to keep them in. And I don't get that. So, of course, he's a privateer and a train robber with BC Rail. He said he wouldn't sell BC Rail. He did. So these are posters that people are supposed to see and remember.
Oh, Bruce, you only got a chance to show 2 of them. I'm sorry, is there what hold up one more and we'll sign out.
One more. Cuts hurt.
Okay.
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 Right.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this. Thank you for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.
So welcome back to segment 3 of Citizens Forum. In this segment of the program, we're going to be talking about issues around electromagnetic radiation, that energy that comes off of all electrical equipment from your toaster and your TV set, and now particularly the dangers of wireless technology like Wi-Fi and things of that nature. I have with me today Dr. Martin Blank, who is an expert in health-related effects of electromagnetic fields, and he's been studying the subject for over 30 years. Dr. Blank earned his first PhD at Columbia University in physical chemistry and a second PhD from University of Cambridge studying colloid science. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
From 1968 to 2011, he taught as an associate professor at Columbia University. He now acts as a special lecturer. Dr. Blank's also a member and an ex-president of the Bioelectromagnetic Society, which is a very prominent society in the United States and worldwide. Dr. Blank has served and has been invited as an expert witness regarding EMF safety for the House Committee on Natural Resources and Energy in Vermont, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health, which is called for an examination of the potential health impacts of radiofrequency radiation on health. And Dr. Blank is an author of a new book called Overpowered: The Dangers of Electromagnetic Radiation and What You Can Do About It. It's available at Amazon.ca. So welcome to the show, Dr. Blank. I looked at your bio, and I'm just really hitting the highlights, maybe, but there's so much I know you've done in your lifetime around this issue, and it's such a pleasure to have you here today. But we have to, I think, start at the beginning for our viewers, and I think we should have a very quick primer on what the issues are. And let's talk about, for instance, to start out with, what is electromagnetic radiation?
Well, most of us, that is our cells and our chemicals, are made up of charged particles, and everybody knows the names, and they know that we have electrons, and we have negatively charged, and protons that are positively charged. Well, the fields that come in contact with these charges will affect them. They will change the way they move. They will make them move at times. And so electromagnetic radiation is, electromagnetism is a fundamental force that will influence the materials that we're made of. And in fact, it does. This is one of the earliest things that was found that in connection with childhood leukemia. That was one of the first things that was noted. Electrification occurred, well, step by step in different places in the country. And what people noticed was that those areas that had electrification, shortly thereafter, there was a bump in the incidence of childhood leukemia. This was pointed out, and as a result, people started to look at that, and they did studies, and there was a study that was done, I think in 1979, that found that indeed there was a correlation between the incidence of childhood leukemia and the exposure to electromagnetic fields. So it wasn't only the electric field, but the magnetic field that can travel without actual contact. And so you ended up getting this bump, and it was shown by the various health committees that this was a probable cause of cancer, and they warned against it. This was back in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. So that's the first big step that has been taken. But there are other steps that the thing is that in addition to the electrical effects and the simple magnetic effects of 60 hertz, that's the simplest kind of electromagnetic stuff we're exposed to. As you go higher frequency, and all that means is that the waves, the electricity and the magnetic fields are changing more rapidly, then you start getting other effects. And that's what we're into now. We've been slowly getting faster and faster waves. And the waves now are in the Wi-Fi range, they're in the radio frequency range, they're microwave, and these effects are coming at us in increasing amounts, and they're having increasing biological effects. And yeah. I think that it's probably, if I can just step a little bit further into the biology part or the physics part of the biology, electric fields will have an effect on charges. You know that the charges and opposite charges will attract, like charges will repel each other. But the thing is that if a charge, a magnetic field will be generated by a moving charge. So you have an overlap between electric fields and magnetic fields. So an electric field will attract a charge, and if the charge is moving, it will generate a magnetic field. So if you have these things going on together, they sort of interact with each other, and you end up getting fields that are electromagnetic. And this especially is important when you get the higher frequency. So when you get into the radio frequency, these signals are actually at the point where you can carry information on them. And that's what we do. We transmit a lot of information in radio waves. You get sound being transmitted, and television goes that way, and Wi-Fi. There are a million uses, one might say.
Astonishing technology.
Yes.
I mean, it's like if you go back 100 years and you were talking about this sort of technology we'd have, they couldn't comprehend that we could have this sort of technology around us.
Well, and it's amazing the rate of growth.
Yeah.
I mean, this stuff is now, when I give a lecture, I show the spectrum. That is the different frequencies that are natural frequencies that one finds in nature. But one doesn't find them all. If you go back 200 years, you won't find the bottom part. The bottom part is missing.
Yeah.
Anything below the sun, when you get, let's say, infrared, which is also below the sun, that comes from the sun. The sun also gives a little bit of this lower frequency stuff, but on the other hand, very, very little.
Yeah.
The only contribution that was there that very low was the Schumann resonances, which occur because there are lightning storms on the Earth, and they generate a certain signal as well. But now you've got that whole bottom region, which was empty all these years, virtually empty, is now getting filled. And they're running out of space. They're giving away different segments of the electromagnetic spectrum, which is what is called this whole array of frequencies. And they've been selling them more and more, and they're all being used. It's amazing. And
It's quite astonishing, because even I say, I started getting interested in this topic about in the early '90s, and I remember reading Sam Milham's stuff about electrification, and
Sam Milham, if I can interrupt you, Sam Milham was the guy who pointed out that this bump occurred in childhood leukemia,
Yeah.
and he told people that that's an important indication that these electric fields are now doing something biological.
yeah, and to me it was like, a rub every day when I picked up a book, and I think you were referencing the Wertheimer and Leeper studies.
Right.
And the childhood leukemia studies, and so that was fairly fresh, like it was done in the late '70s.
79.
So and so I was coming around. I was reading some of the stuff in the early '90s, and I was really astonished by it. I was an electrician. I'm still an electrician, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm getting a lot of exposure, and I was at the time. I really changed my way I did my trade, and also changed the way I promoted the electrical industry and the products that I sell and all that. So it was a life-changing thing for me, and but still wireless. People were saying, "Oh boy, we're in trouble now. Cell phones are here," and I'm going, "Oh really? Oh no, I didn't really want to know about that, because I thought cell phone was such a great idea, and I was carrying a cell phone from early '80s, and then the evidence piled up. And pretty soon my cell phone went, because I couldn't operate with that cell phone. And I also could just see the evidence was too powerful. But in the end, of course, human nature being what it is, the convenience seems to be overriding the health concerns. And I've watched 20 years of us sort of slipping in the wrong direction on the overall awareness level. But perhaps maybe we're going to see a change there.
Well, whether we see a change or not, in terms of, I doubt it, because it really is very enticing technology. I mean, even we changed. We had cables all over our television, not television, a computer room with the stuff. And the thing is, we recently changed to wireless connection, because the cables were it was a mess that you just couldn't find. If anything went wrong, it took for hours to figure it out. But the thing is, people don't realize you can shut off the wireless.
Yeah.
And nobody does it. They let the thing go all night when they're asleep and they're not using the wireless.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing that people ought to do, and it's the simplest thing to do. Just unplug it or pull the plug out when you're not using it, and that'll lower the exposure. But even more important is shut off your cell phone before you put it in your pocket.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, the cell phone is telling the antenna, the tower, where you are by sending signals, and you're answering back and forth, and that each time it answers the tower, it's sending a signal through you.
Yeah, and always a problem, because the exposure is very high because of the proximity to your body. And that's like, it doesn't take a really strong signal to make some big changes. And there it is right against your body. So never a good idea. I'm going to start quizzing you a little bit, because we're going to run out of time.
Oh, go right ahead.
And now you have to answer some tough questions. I mean, nice overview of the situation, but now we're into this crux of trying to get our regulators to look at the issue, and you look at it scientifically, let's say. And I think it'd be wise to sort of explain to our viewers, let's say, for instance, we know Health Canada regulates us, and they regulate this exposure standards for this type of radiation. But perhaps you should tell us, how does Health Canada set their standards? What is the criteria they use, and to define safety, let's say, and how does that differ from the sort of things that we're talking about today?
Well, the people who make these decisions are by and large not biologists. And the fact that they're not biologists means that they have to find a criterion that they're not familiar with. And it may even be irrelevant, but the fact is that's what they're dealing with. So they've said that if things are, if there's a certain amount of energy deposited, it'll do some damage. And if there's more energy, it'll do more damage. And so they set a point at which the energy is piling up, and they measure the temperature. And so this is known as the thermal criterion. And they set a value. Well, I ask cells how they feel about the different exposures. And when you ask them, they give you an unequivocal answer, because there's something called a cellular stress response. And they react to temperature. In fact, that was the first thing that was measured. It's called a heat shock response. And the heat shock response involves making special proteins. There are about 20 of these proteins, and the cell starts to make them, and it's an indication that the cell has to do something to correct the damage, to prevent further damage, things like that. Well, when you apply the temperature, an increase in temperature, it makes stress proteins, sure enough. But it starts to make stress proteins at a much lower level of electromagnetic exposure. And that, I think, is the key, that the people who are setting the standards are using the wrong ruler. They're not measuring the right kind of thing to tell if your cells are safe. And the upshot is that if you look at these studies that have been done, there are more and more studies showing that there is an increase in things like cancer. Recently, there was some discussion that the brain cancer was really not increasing. Somebody had found some data, they published it, and they made a whole to-do about it. Recently it was found out that they changed the way in which they were collecting the data. And so these are data that come from Scandinavia. And now somebody did a study and found that the studies that were omitted or taken off this particular measure, when you add them together, there's no doubt that the number of cancers, brain cancers, are increasing.
Yeah.
So that these are the kinds of problems or issues that surround the human exposure, and the need to find a safe criterion to protect people.
So, for instance, could I say, would it be fair to say, like Health Canada, setting standards based upon a thermal effect on the human body, that anything less than what actually causes the body to warm up seems to be a safe level exposure for them? Is that a fair assessment?
Well, yeah, I guess roughly speaking, I would say yes.
You know, it's a crude way of putting it, but on the other hand, and from what I know of this, and what you've been explaining here is that the actual biological changes that occur can occur at much less levels of exposure.
No doubt about that.
So now we're in this kind of, we're stuck. We have Health Canada seemingly unwilling to look at all this other evidence. They've just reviewed their safety standards again and pretty well republished them pretty well at the same levels as before with minor tweaking, but nothing that important. Recently, in the last couple of 3 years, we have Frank Clegg and the Canadians for Safe Technology have arrived and really have done some fantastic work, I think, in informing the politicians and trying to make some changes. And I know what they call the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health, which just met again in March, and I know you participated in that. Were you finding there was a little more receptivity to your message this time than before? Or do you see any glimmers of hope here?
Well, I guess last week or before, we actually had an interview with the House Committee, and the fact is that the questions were quite pointed, directed at the people from the panel that made these decisions. And I think they realize that there are structural problems with the way the safety standard is being constructed. If you don't have a biologist on the committee, or I don't care, maybe they call them biologists, but if you don't have somebody who understands the biology and the developments that have been occurring in there and trying to understand what will affect the health of a cell, you're not going to come up with a correct answer. It's just as simple as that. I mean, you don't go to a dentist if you have a heart problem. That at least most people wouldn't. And the thing is that you've got to find the right specialist, and you need somebody who understands how the body accommodates these various stresses that are brought to bear on it. And it's easy. I mean, there's a whole literature on that, and there are
Yeah.
people who know it.
Yeah, and you know, and there's lots of great things to read. I'm sure you are aware of like Dr. Robert Becker and
Oh, yes.
a couple of books he wrote, and he was some of the first books I read. And pick them up, read them. They read like a novel, and there it is. He's so well introduced the topic on how it all goes. And what I loved about his writing was he was saying, "Hey, this can be beneficial."
Yes.
And that was quite enlightening for me, you know, that, oh yeah, if it's biologically, creates biological activity, well, maybe it could be done for the good too.
Well, this very thing, the stress proteins, have been shown to have a positive effect, because if you induce them before some dangerous, not dangerous, but some procedure that's going to cause problems, if you start off with these stress proteins beforehand, you have a better chance of the way the thing's going to work out. We actually published a paper on that.
Yeah.
So it's you can use, once you understand the way the body works, you can use its effects to your advantage.
You know, we'd love to have you back, and there's so much more to talk about. And it's so interesting to have someone that really has spent the time and really have done the research. And I hope you're willing to come back and talk to us, because we're out of time for today. And I just want to thank Dr. Blank for coming in, and thank all the staff and volunteers here for the great work they're doing. See you next week.
Welcome to the last segment of Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Tuesday, April the 7th, Memorial Arena, Victoria, BC. Thanks again to the volunteer crew and Shaw staff that makes it all happen. The guest in this segment is Will Smith, and we're going to be talking about consciousness in Russia.
Okay. Yes. Well, I set up a Facebook, the equivalent of a Facebook account in Russia. It's called Moy Mir, which is My World, and my Russian is non-existent. So I'm learning Russian from doing this too, and it makes me do it. So I have to get up and, you know, it's like Facebook. You have to do it. You just have to look. And the thing that I think there are a couple of funny things that. The first thing that I think is really funny is that. From the news, the little news that I've read here, Putin is sort of portrayed as being a very, I don't know, sort of military type of guy. And in Russia, the commentary that I've read is that they're worried that he's too much of a bureaucrat and that he won't really do anything. So I think that's really interesting. But then the other thing is a sort of a change of consciousness of all the things that have gone in the past, over the past 100 years. And I feel that just from what I'm reading, is that people who are writing about this feel like they've been taken advantage of, and that they understand that they've been used as sort of an experiment by the capitalists to see how it would do. And I don't know, some of the posts mention, you know, the same things we talk about, but from their point of view. And so, it seems to me that people in the discussions are very careful to differentiate between the Western governments and the people of the West.
Oh, thank
so
heavens for
yeah,
that.
that's one of the things I put on my page is I don't hate anybody here. I don't want to kill anybody in Russia. I have nothing against Russians. I just want to know what's going on and see,
exactly.
because it's just
We're being sort of pitted against each other.
well, and the thing is that Russia is so. It's isolated from us because it's far away, and the language is different, and the letters are different, so the character set is different. Yeah. So it's harder to understand what they're saying.
But for some reason, I mean, especially in the last year or so, Russia has just been demonized by certainly our Prime Minister and those around him and the media.
Well, the thing they've been saying in this, the things that I've been reading are that people see that it's been a setup, the situation in the Ukraine, that it was just a complete setup from the United States government and everything. So, I mean, it's really nice to see that people are figuring things out over there, too. It seems like the whole world is waking up to really what's going on.
Yeah, I hope so.
People are being taken advantage of.
We need a huge wake up. So what kind of feeling do you get when you're talking to people in Russia? What's going on?
Well, I get the feeling that it's really hard for us to understand them because we have such a different standard of living. They've had 100 years of hell, or probably more than that. And we've had 100 years of a nice civil society.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
true.
while
They were destroyed in World War
I know,
II.
yeah. So the interesting thing is that they're kind of they're at the bottom and looking up, and we're sort of up here, and we don't even know how far we have to go down. I mean, it's kind of pathetic.
So you're on, I'm not even on Facebook here, but you're on Facebook in Russia.
It's
and-
equivalent. It's a type of thing. Yeah. I mean, I'm on Facebook too, but of course there aren't as many Russians on the Facebook. There are some. I follow some Russian things.
Are you, I guess you're obviously communicating in English.
No, communicating in Russian. I just run it through Google Translate. I just
Oh, okay.
type what I want. And it's kind of funny. I just think of how somebody with a Russian accent would talk, and I put that into Google Translate with some words reordered or missing. Like I don't put "the" in for every sentence, and it comes up, and then I retranslate it back into English in case I've said something that gets retranslated and has some kind of a funny something that it says that I don't want it to say.
Right.
It's a little hard. Russian's an inflected language. They use endings on the words to show what their function is in the sentence. So it's different from ours where we use word order. So it's more like German. It makes you think in a different way.
Yeah, it's true. Language does make you think in a different way. My own feeling about Russia, well, my grandparents came from Russia. So
Oh,
how
really?
about that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So-
very interesting. It's just interesting to dive in. And, of course, I always thank people for friending me and saying, I'm here to learn Russian. I don't speak Russian.
Yeah.
So, but it's
I mean,
really been a fun experience
Yeah,
to do
my
that.
own take on it is that people everywhere in the world are pretty much exactly the same. in
Yeah, I
terms
think we're
of-
all
yeah.
going through something. I think it's a general awakening in the whole world. I mean, and the internet is certainly a huge part of it, that, we can all communicate with each other and nobody can get in our way. You don't have to have somebody telling you what this person is saying wherever it is, in Ukraine or in Russia or whatever. And it makes me read the news a lot differently too, because of what people are actually saying that I'm talking to and what I read here online. It's
So we've
different.
got this news service called thebridgenewsservice.com. So if anybody wants to Google thebridgenewsservice.com, and we were saying earlier we'd like to get into some of the newspapers in Russia because we think that they might be interested in printing some of the
Yeah,
stories.
well, we'll
we
see
put
what
out.
happens. I mean, all of this is an experiment, the new media, and we're just trying different things.
Yeah.
So,
if somebody who's watching wants to somehow get onto Facebook in Russia, how do you do it?
it's it's just you go to mail.ru, mail.ru, and then you have to be able to read or run through the translator at least, translate from Russian into English, and you can figure it out. It took me a couple of months to get used to reading it, and
So you've really got to make an effort.
you've got to
do
make
this.
an effort, yeah. But if you make a little effort every day, my rule is 15 minutes. If you get into it for 15 minutes a day, it's amazing what you can learn. It's
Yeah.
really amazing what you can learn.
And
So-
of course, English, luckily for us, is the language of the world, really. And I'm sure a lot of people in Russia speak great English, so you can probably do it in English too.
It's possible. The people that
run
I'm
into
talking
it.
to don't speak English, but anyway. Well, thanks for having me, Jack. This has been
Thank you, Will.
really interesting. So.
Thanks for watching Citizens Forum this week.